What will the Dallas Cowboys do with Ezekiel Elliott's contract this offseason? All that more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me, as always, is Leighton McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. We've got a fantastic guest lined up for you guys today. It's Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus. Follow him on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Brad, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. I'm glad I earned a second trip to the pod.
Of course, anytime. So we're going to talk all things Cowboys free agency and offseason, but let's just first start with this. What kind of cap situation are the Cowboys in right now, and how much cap could they free up, realistically over the next month or so?
We're actually in a pretty healthy cap situation. I know when you look at just the one static number of their projected 2023 cap space, looks like it's $7 million or so over right now. But they have a ton of ways they can clear a ton of room. Even with just 5 moves, you can clear over $50 million. And I think they're all moves that they'll at least consider. That would be restructuring Dak Prescott, restructuring DeMarcus Lawrence, restructuring, maybe even extending on a short-term basis Zach Martin, restructuring Michael Gallup, and then I went ahead and gave Zeke Elliott a $5 million pay cut. We'll dive into that more, but those moves alone, you're clearing over $50 million. They're 20th in cash spending for next year as of today. They are plenty healthy. I'm sure Jerry might try to say they're not, but they can do a lot if they want to.
So, we that's the thing that has been on a lot of people's minds, is that they look at the cap number and they think, oh my gosh, the Cowboys are over the cap, and it's a freak out situation. There's been tons of years the Cowboys have pulled these roster triggers and kind of freed up more space. Once they do kind of get into that situation and they start freeing up some of the space, we should start talking about some of these situations. Like you mentioned, you had a Zeke with a $5 million pay cut. Do you prefer a situation where the Cowboys try to retain him and then see if he can take a pay cut, as opposed to releasing him outright? And what do you think the pros and the cons are there?
Yeah, I think they got a huge benefit from the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Jones going ahead and being the first team to do that. If Aaron Jones is doing it, I think Dallas, you could say, we think he's on your caliber of player, at least right now where you are in your respective careers. And he's taking this pay cut in the 3rd year of his recent extension. I want to say this is Zeke's 4th or 5th new year of his, 6-year deal from back in the day. So, I think that does establish a strong precedent. And you can say, look, if you hit the open market, odds are he's owed a $10.9 million salary. He might not even get $5.9 million on the open market. So under this hypothetical pay cut, they probably could make a legitimate case that we're still paying you more than anybody else. And would I keep him? Yeah, honestly, I would. I think ownership and even some coaches saying, kind of weirdly, in my opinion, that Pollard is a Ferrari. You can't play him a ton. He has to, come off the field at times, play less than 50% of snaps. I think having Zeke, even if he is kind of like a short yardage, goal line back type player, there's still value in that, and he's still very good in those areas.
All right, Brad, I want to go back to this. Zeke could, how much money he could get on the open market, because that's what I keep coming back to is you mentioned a $5 million pay cut, and I'm wondering, why couldn't it be more? Because I look at all the free agent running backs, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Miles Sanders, Tony Pollard, David Montgomery, and I don't see him getting paid more than any of those guys. So if you're the Cowboys, why not ask him to take an even bigger pay cut, knowing that there's a chance he only gets like a 1-year, $3 million deal in free agency?
Oh, it's entirely fair. It's entirely reasonable, and you probably could. Because also now that Green Bay did this, you probably see Cincinnati maybe with Mixon, Minnesota with Dalvin Cook. Alvin Kamara is going to get suspended, but that's kind of an interesting situation there as well. Like a lot of these guys on these similar deals, those teams are also probably going to go to them and ask the same thing. So you're right. I mean, I put 5 as kind of just like a placeholder. You could say, hey, we're going to chop it down to $3.5 million from 10.9, and we still don't think you're going to beat that on the open market. And again, they might be right.
Do you think? Do you think he would? Like, realistically, if you were another team that just needs a veteran running back, like, what would you offer him?
See, the thing there is, like, I do wonder how much value he can get out of being a name and a face and a guy that obviously has, a household recognition and all those things. Some teams will pay a little bit, not like a ton extra, but, a little bit extra to bring that in. Or maybe he gets kind of a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal where he makes more in cash than that in the first year of the deal. He may ultimately not last the entire, let's say, 3-year contract, but with a signing bonus in the first year of salary, maybe it pays him more than that. So that's why you got to find a middle ground of you're competing against the first year cash flow. For example, like Leonard Fournette signs a 3-year, was it 21 or 24, whatever it is, either 7 a year or 8 a year. His first year cash flow this year was over $10 million, right? So it's like, because it was over multiple years, I'm sure they regretted that immediately. But you can
They definitely did, without a doubt.
You can do that if you sign on for a little bit longer.
So I guess the other side of this equation, and we can't talk about running backs too much, or Marcus's head will explode. But the other side of this equation is, let's say, and we don't know yet whether it's a reduction, a cut, whatever. Let's just say that Zeke takes a pay cut in some form or fashion. That number comes down. What do you think is the best way for the Cowboys to handle the other half of that equation? That's Tony Pollard. I mean, the injury obviously clouds some things. It was already, like Marcus mentioned, already a very crowded free agent market. What do you think the best way to handle the situation with Pollard is? And is it potentially using a tag or some sort of transition tag as a placeholder for a long-term?
Yeah, the injury is super complicating and makes it very difficult. So I think, kind of not even a cop-out answer. I think it probably was a potential solution regardless, was using the franchise tag. I think the transition tag, someone might sign him to a deal that you're not willing to match, and then you lose him for nothing. So I think it's a bit of a risk here with Tony Pollard. Again, the injury is kind of the monkey wrench in the whole situation. But I think a franchise tag is a realistic possibility, about $10.1 million. He might get a deal for around that, on a multi-year basis in theory. So go that route, see if you can work out a multi-year extension before the July 15th deadline. Of course, the next question is, do they want to save that for Dalton Schultz potentially? And that kind of complicates matters a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned it. We're going to talk about Dalton Schultz and whether the Cowboys can bring him back after franchise tagging him last year. All that and more in just a sec. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from money lines to point spreads to three-pointers drained, the number of dunks in a game. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your first no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, we're back with Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus. You mentioned Dalton Schultz before the break. The Cowboys franchised him last year. Doesn't appear that they're going to franchise him this year. What type of money do you expect him to get on the open market?
Yeah, so the tight end market is so bizarre, where there's kind of this cap still with George Kittle's deal signed now a couple of years ago at around $15 million a year. I know technically Darren Waller is listed at $17 million per year, but it's kind of artificially inflated on the back end, and we'll see if he even makes that money. So in my opinion, it's still kind of the ceiling is 15, and we've seen all these guys come up, and Dallas Goedert, Mark Andrews, and now we're seeing guys like David Njoku, Dawson Knox, like that are still below that number, but they're getting really, really close, right? Even the Hunter Henrys, the Jonnu Smiths at 12.5. So Long answer short, I think it's going to be just below. Like I would see 14.5 million per year. Honestly, like he has a case to try to get more. I know people always want to say, oh, he's not better than George Kittle. He signed in 2020. We're talking about
Doesn't matter,
2023.
right?
That's how kind of the markets grow. So, but look, he's better than Dawson Knox, and I think he's probably better than David Njoku as well. I think maybe Goddard, Andrews, you could argue those, but nevertheless, I think just below that 15 million per year number.
What tight end is it going to take to break that $15 million a year? Is it going to? I'm assuming he's got to be next year's free agent class. But I mean, who do you see in the horizon that will eclipse that? I mean, what's crazy is like you mentioned, that's a 3-year-old deal and it's still the market center. So like, who's it going to take to break that 15 million?
No, it's a great question, and it's funny because we always talk about running back and stuff like this, but it's so hard for tight ends as well. There's just so much leverage from the teams. The shelf life is also super short, just like running backs, and it's just kind of hard to break through. I do think TJ Hawkinson actually on an early extension this offseason from Minnesota. Obviously, trade a second-round pick to bring him in, going into the 5th-year option, top 10 pick, all those things. He and his agent, I would argue, like owe a service to the rest of the NFL to try to take a deal for more than that $15 million a year. But yeah, beyond that, it's like, can Kyle Pitts get healthy, get back to what we saw from Kyle Pitts' rookie season? And at that point, he might even argue he's a wide receiver and try to get like a pseudo, type deal. But that's, you're right. It's not like it's like a obvious answer on the horizon.
All right, Brad. So I don't get the feeling, Leighton, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't get the feeling that the Cowboys are going to give Schultz $14 million a year. I mean, maybe if they could really stretch this out over a 4 or 5 year, deal, that would make sense. But if the Cowboys don't sign Schultz, is there a tight end in free agency that you like on a 1 or 2 year deal that you think could give you similar type of production?
There are a handful of guys. I don't think they're quite at the caliber of a Dalton Schultz, but solid players. You could maybe look at a guy like a Foster Moreau, the Las Vegas Raiders. I would have loved for him to maybe take more advantage of Darren Waller's injury and maybe been a little bit more productive. But, a solid young player. If you're looking more for like a veteran stopgap, but, I know Austin Hooper's career in Cleveland kind of fizzled out, but was honestly quietly pretty good in Tennessee last year. Still only 28 years old. He's probably around the same age as Dalton Schultz, honestly, maybe a year older. And it's just like a high floor guy that you then pair with, the young guys like Ferguson and Hendershot, and it's probably enough of a room by committee that you feel comfortable with it.
All right, let's start talking about some of these other free agents the Cowboys are going to have to deal with outside of the running backs. We could go over some more running backs if you want, contracts if you want, Marcus. But
no, we're good.
Let's start talking about some of the other guys that we really want to kind of try to have back that are unrestricted free agents. Let's start with Leighton Vander Esch. What is his market going to look like? He really had a bounce back season, I think, last year. And of all the Cowboys that made themselves some money, we'll talk about Wilson, who I think also potentially made himself some money as well. But let's start with Leighton Vander Esch. I think he re-signed last year for a 1 year. Was it $2 million deal? If I'm not mistaken?
Like that.
Something like that. Nothing. So what's his market going to look like going into this free agency cycle?
I think it was a bit surprising that he got the 1 year, $2 million deal, like you mentioned. Not that he was going to break the bank, but it seemed like he would do a little bit better than that.
It was a great deal.
This is the year,
for the Cowboys.
I think this is the year where he does get that multi-year extension. I think it'll be around, let's say, $6 to $8 million per year. Again, nothing crazy, but a solid, number 2 type money off-ball linebacker in today's market. Like you said, big bounce back year, stayed healthy. I know he had the injury at the end of the year, but was able to come back for the playoffs. I think it looked good, moved well, had a couple pass breakups in that playoff game and looked good. Somewhere in that range.
It does feel like teams are his market's going to be kind of small, right? Because there's not many teams that want a 255-pound linebacker with some neck injuries. So I think probably 6-7 million does feel right. So listen, if that's the deal for Dallas, sign me up all day.
Yeah,
I got to ask you about Donovan Wilson in the safety market because I don't understand the safety market at all. Some years we get guys that get huge contracts like Marcus Williams, and then other years we get, where there's just a whole bunch of these guys left over. So for somebody like Donovan Wilson, who, it's just finishing up his rookie contract, what are you expecting him to get in free agency?
So the thing with safety is it's basically become so flooded with talent. There are so many solid players that if you're not one of those top of market guys like a Marcus Williams, instead of it being a gradual drop, it just kind of falls off a cliff. There's not really much of a middle tier. So, I have him getting, a 2 year, $5.75 million per year deal. You're looking at your Jaron Curses, maybe Tracy Walker is a bit of more of a ceiling comp, but in that range. And again, I think he's a good player, maybe worth more than that, but just the amount of available talent on the market suppresses those contracts at that position a lot.
Yeah, and I wonder. I mean, that's honestly right at the price point. I think that Wilson should go at. Like, I think that's right where I'm comfortable feeling. Yes, okay. Like, let's talk about one more other guy that, it's funny because you look at you go and you look at the percentage of snaps that that some of these free agents played, right? And Donovan Wilson surprisingly was the highest one. I was a little bit shocked because I thought for sure that Conor McGovern, who was also a free agent, would have definitely been that guy just because of how much he's had to play and also because of injury at different points he's had to move around. So what are we looking at for Conor McGovern? I mean, the Cowboys are kind of in a situation where they feel like they want to improve at that guard position, but it may be the more prudent route to see if they can get someone who's comfortable in their system to come back on at least a short-term deal or maybe a kind of at least a 2 or 3 year deal. What's Conor McGovern's market going to look like? Because I haven't really seen what the rest of the guard market looks like.
It's actually a decent amount of guys. There's no like big name, splash, maybe like a Brand Sheriff last year. Although I think Jacksonville probably would like to have that one back already.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of like solid guys, like your Dalton Risner. I mean, Isaac Sumalo from Philadelphia is a very good player. Some injury concerns, but Dalton Risner, Ben Powers in Baltimore, a lot of guys that I think are going to get solid deals, but nothing crazy. I would say McGovern's probably a step below that. I do think it helps that. I think he's a better pass protector than he is a run blocker. I know our grades reflect that as well. And obviously that's generally where you're going to get some more money is if you excel in that facet. But I still would think somewhere in the range of maybe like a Pat Elflein who was like 3 years, $9 million, maybe 2 years, $6 million. Like, I don't think it's going to be anything crazy in that $3 to $4 million per year range.
All right, we've got Brad Spielberger here from Pro Football Focus. We're going to get into more questions coming up next. All right, Brad, here's my question for you. If Jerry Jones makes you the GM tomorrow and you're in charge of running the Cowboys offseason, what would your ideal offseason look like for the Cowboys? Is it bringing back Tony Pollard? Is it franchising Dalton Schultz? What would you like to see them do this offseason?
Honestly, I'd be pretty darn aggressive. We always talk a ton about maximizing the quarterback contract. We have a rookie contract quarterback. Yes, obviously Dallas is now spending $40 million a year on Dak Prescott, but A, isn't crazy, especially in today's landscape, and B, let's maximize the rookie contract window of maybe the best defensive player in the NFL and Micah Parsons before he starts making $30 million a year. Let's maximize CeeDee Lamb before he's up for a new deal. Tyler Smith, we think he's going to be that blue chip left tackle, the next couple of years. So like I said, they're 20th in cash spending as of today. I would try to make it work with Schultz. They obviously, made a bunch of moves at tight end to kind of prepare themselves to maybe move on there. But then if not, I'm going after pass catchers, whether that's, via trade for some guys maybe intrigue you, or it's, it's not a great free agent class at wide receiver, but I think you do need to add another pass catcher in this offense. I do think Gallup will get healthy and play better. Maybe we'll see growth from, I'm blanking on his name now, the third round pick from last year who didn't play at all.
Jalen Tolbert. Yeah, I don't think
Jalen Tolbert from South Alabama, so like there's things you could hope for, but I would add more there.
Can I ask a follow-up question really quickly? You mentioned CeeDee Lamb, right? So he's going into year 4, so it means he's eligible for a contract extension. Yeah. Would that be something that you would prioritize this offseason, like trying to get him done before Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and some of these other receivers come up?
Nice. You got to at least consider it and look into what that market looks like. Generally, except for quarterback, you're usually going to see teams wait until going into the 5th-year option because they have that for those receivers. So, hey, if you think you can get a good deal on him and lock him up long-term before, like you said, the explosion of guys like a Jefferson, a Chase, and so on and so forth, then yeah, go for it. But I think agents also realize that and would know like, hey, this is where the market is going. So we want a deal commensurate with where it's going to be, not where it is right now. But yeah, he's eligible. So you definitely have the conversation. But if I had to bet on it, I think they would wait another year and extend him going into that 5th-year option.
All right, let's talk about one more situation that's kind of similar to the Pollard situation where there's a lot of moving parts here and it's going to affect exactly how it gets rolled out. And that's Terrence Steele. Terrence Steele, obviously on a restricted free agent contract, dealing with an ACL injury that he suffered later in the year, not quite at the end of the year, but it's still something that likely will be affecting him as he enters training camp, or at least he'll still be kind of coming off of going into training camp. What do you think is the best way to handle Terrence Steele? I know that the Cowboys clearly like him a lot. He's a leader in the clubhouse. I know that they want to have him back. What would you say is the best way to handle it where the Cowboys get what they want, but also do it in probably the cheapest way that they possibly can?
Yeah, no, super unfortunate injury. I mean, I think a really ascending, good young player that, maybe was a rarity of a guy getting an extension on the RFA 10. Not rarity, but, it doesn't happen all the time. But when you have a good player that earns that early, a guy like a Puna Ford in Seattle a couple years ago, one example, you maybe pull the trigger. Now I think you placed a second-round tender, which off the top of my head, I think is like $4.6 million. Don't quote me on that. But, because that way, a team would have to give you a second-round pick if they're going to sign him to an offer sheet. You definitely cannot do anything less than that. And then I think because of the ACL tear, you probably don't have to go to a first-round tender status. I don't think anyone's going to give you a first-rounder to sign him. But, yeah, you have to at least place a second-rounder. Like you said, keeps it cheap. You then go into next year. If he plays well, you then revisit the long-term deal conversation.
Brad, God, do you have a follow-up question, Landon?
I was just going to say there was one more thing I wanted to add, just kind of in general, that it made me think. The Cowboys had, for the first time, it seems like in a while, a lot of success adding, kind of 1-year veterans to their team at positions where they had holes throughout the season. They obviously did it throughout the season, which is kind of a new thing, but they also added a lot of these guys, up front. Is there anyone that you see that is on in the free agent market that you feel like is a good kind of stopgap fit at any of these positions that, maybe has experience with Quinn or maybe has experience with Mike McCarthy that just feels like a very natural fit on a kind of a veteran 1-year or 2-year deal?
There are a handful of older players. I'm trying to think of connections to the coaching staff. I can't really pull any name right now, but if you mentioned they did very well in a lot of these kind of stopgap deals. Maybe you add a little more juice at edge rusher if you're going to lose some guys and you bring in a veteran, like a Melvin Ingram or one of those, older players. I don't know if Justin Houston would be around, but,
what about Deion Jones?
Yeah. Or, I think again, Odell probably wants a multi-year deal, but I think you still have to go back to that well and have those conversations again. And then, I guess, a guy like a Marvin Jones, if you want to just add a big body on the outside, kind of has lost a step at this point, but still reliable, go up and get it type guy. I do think you should explore those markets for sure.
All right, Brad, thank you so much for jumping on. We're going to have you back once the Cowboys do make some moves in free agency, talk about how all these contracts went down. So we thank you for your time. Everybody go out and follow Brad on Twitter. It's at PFF_Brad. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys right back here tomorrow.